Chapter 36. Meow. During my trip to Ilium and to points beyond, a 2-week expedition bridging Christmas, I let a poor poet named Sherman Krebs have my New York City apartment for free. My second wife had left me on the grounds that I was too pessimistic for an optimist to live with. Krebs was a bearded man, a platinum blonde Jesus with spaniel eyes. He was no close friend of mine. I'd met him at a cocktail party where he presented himself as national chairman of poets and painters for immediate nuclear war. He begged for shelter, not necessarily bomb-proof, and it happened that I had some. When I returned to my apartment, still twangering with the puzzling spiritual implications of the unclaimed stone angel in Ilium, I found my apartment wrecked by a nihilistic debauch. Krebs was gone, but before leaving he had rung up $300 worth of long-distance calls, set my couch on fire in 5 places, killed my cat and my avocado tree, and torn the door off my medicine cabinet. He wrote this poem in what turned out to be excrement on the yellow linoleum floor of my kitchen. I have a kitchen, but it is not a complete kitchen. I will not be truly gay until I have a dispose all. Sorry about that. There was another message written in lipstick in a feminine hand on the wallpaper over my bed. It said, "No, no, no," said Chicken Licken. There was a sign hung around my dead cat's neck. It said, "Meow." I have not seen Krebs since. Nevertheless, I sensed that he was my cuirass. If he was, he served it as a rang-rang. A rang-rang, according to Buchanan, is a person who steers people away from a line of speculation by reducing that line, with the example of the rang-rang's own life, to an absurdity. I might have been vaguely inclined to dismiss the stone angel as meaningless, and to go from there to the meaninglessness of all. But after I saw what Krebs had done, in particular what he had done to my sweet cat, nihilism was not for me. Somebody or something did not wish me to be a nihilist. It was Krebs's mission, whether he knew it or not, to disenchant me with that philosophy. Well done, Mr. Krebs. Well done. End of chapter 36. Chapter 37. A Modern Major General. And then, one Sunday, I found out where the fugitive from justice, the model maker, the great god Jehovah and Beelzebub of bugs in mason jars was, where Franklin Honecker could be found. He was alive! The news was in a special supplement to the New York Sunday Times. The supplement was a paid ad for a Banana Republic. On its cover was the profile of the most heartbreakingly beautiful girl I ever hoped to see. Beyond the girl, bulldozers were knocking down palm trees, making a broad avenue. At the end of the avenue were the steel skeletons of 3 new buildings. "The Republic of San Lorenzo," said the copy on the cover. "On the move. A healthy, happy, progressive, freedom-loving, beautiful nation makes itself extremely attractive to American investors and tourists alike." I was in no hurry to read the contents. The girl on the cover was enough for me. More than enough, since I had fallen in love with her on sight. She was very young and very grave, too, and luminously compassionate and wise. She was as brown as chocolate, her hair like golden flax. Her name was Mona Ammons Monsanto, the cover said. She was the adopted daughter of the dictator of the island. I opened the supplement, hoping for more pictures of this sublime mongrel Madonna. I found instead a portrait of the island's dictator, Miguel Papa Monsanto, a gorilla in his late 70s. Next to Papa's portrait was a picture of a narrow-shouldered, fox-faced, immature young man. He wore a snow-white military blouse with some sort of jeweled sunburst hanging on it. His eyes were close together. They had circles under them. He had apparently told barbers all his life to shave the sides and back of his head, but to leave the top of his hair alone. He had a wiry pompadour, sort of cube of hair, marcelled, that arose to an incredible height. This unattractive child was identified as Major General Franklin Honecker, Minister of Science and Progress in the Republic of San Lorenzo. He was 26 years old. End of chapter 37. Chapter 38. Barracuda, Capital of the World. San Lorenzo was 50 miles long and 20 miles wide, I learned from the supplement to the New York Sunday Times. Its population was 450,000 souls, all fiercely dedicated to the ideas of the free world. Its highest point, Mount McCabe, was 11,000 feet above sea level. Its capital was Bolivar, a strikingly modern city built on a harbor capable of sheltering the entire United States Navy. The principal exports were sugar, coffee, bananas, indigo, and handcrafted novelties. And sports fishermen recognized San Lorenzo as the unchallenged barracuda capital of the world. I wondered how Franklin Honecker, who had never even finished high school, had got himself such a fancy job. I found a partial answer in an essay on San Lorenzo that was signed by Papa Manzano. Papa said that Frank was the architect of the San Lorenzo Master Plan, which included new roads, rural electrification, sewage disposal plants, hotels, hospitals, clinics, railroads, the works. And though the essay was brief and tightly edited, Papa referred to Frank 5 times as the blood son of Dr. Felix Honecker. The phrase reeked of cannibalism. Papa plainly felt that Frank was a chunk of the old man's magic meat. Chapter 39. Fata Morgana. A little more light was shed by another essay in the supplement, a florid essay titled, What San Lorenzo Has Meant to One American. It was almost certainly ghost-written, but it was signed by Major General Franklin Honecker. In the essay, Frank told of being all alone on the nearly swamped 68-foot Chris craft in the Caribbean. He didn't explain what he was doing on it or how he happened to be alone. He did indicate, though, that his point of departure had been Cuba. The luxurious pleasure craft was going down, and my meaningless life with it, said the essay. All I'd eaten for 4 days was 2 biscuits and a seagull. The dorsal fins of man-eating sharks were cleaving the warm seas around me, and needle-teethed barracuda were making those waters boil. I raised my eyes to my Maker, willing to accept whatever his decision might be. And my eyes alit on a glorious mountain peak above the clouds. Was this Fata Morgana, the cruel deception of a mirage? I looked up Fata Morgana at this point in my reading, learned that it was, in fact, a mirage named after Morgan Le Fay, a fairy who lived at the bottom of a lake. It was famous for appearing in the Strait of Messina, between Calabria and Sicily. Fata Morgana was poetic crap, in short. What Frank saw from his sinking pleasure craft was not cruel Fata Morgana, but the peak of Mount McCabe. Gentle seas then nuzzled Frank's pleasure craft to the rocky shores of San Lorenzo, as though God had wanted him to go there. Frank stepped ashore, dry-shod, and asked where he was. The essay didn't say so, but the son of a bitch had a piece of Ice 9 with him, and a thermos jug. Frank, having no passport, was put in jail by the capital city of Bolivar. He was visited there by Papa Manzano, who wanted to know if it were possible that Frank was a blood relative of the immortal Dr. Felix Honecker. I admitted I was, said Frank in the essay. Since that moment, every door to opportunity in San Lorenzo has been opened wide to me. Chapter 40. House of Hope and Mercy. As it happened, as it was supposed to happen, Bakonin would say, I was assigned by a magazine to do a story in San Lorenzo. The story wasn't to be about Papa Manzano or Frank. It was to be about Julian Castle, an American sugar millionaire who had, at the age of 40, followed the example of Dr. Albert Schweitzer by founding a free hospital in the jungle, by devoting his life to a miserable folk of another race. Castle's hospital was called the House of Hope and Mercy in the Jungle. Its jungle was on San Lorenzo, among the wild coffee trees on the northern slope of Mount McCabe. When I flew to San Lorenzo, Julian Castle was 60 years old. He had been absolutely unselfish for 20 years. In his selfish days, he had been as familiar to tabloid readers as Tommy Manville, Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, and Barbara Hutton. His fame had rested on lechery, alcoholism, reckless driving, and draft evasion. He had a dazzling talent for spending millions without increasing mankind's stores of anything but chagrin. He had been married 5 times and had produced 1 son. The one son, Philip Castle, was the manager and owner of the hotel at which I was planned to stay. The hotel was called the Casa Mona and was named after Mona Ammons Manzano, the blonde girl on the cover of the supplement to the New York Sunday Times. The Casa Mona was brand new. It was one of 3 new buildings in the background of the supplement's portrait of Mona. While I didn't feel that purposeful seas were wafting me to San Lorenzo, I did feel that love was doing the job. The Fata Morgana, the mirage of what it would be like to be loved by Mona Ammons Manzano, had become a tremendous force in my meaningless life. I imagined that she could make me far happier than any woman had so far succeeded in doing. Chapter 41, A Cuirass Built for 2. The seating on the airplane, bound ultimately for San Lorenzo from Miami, was 3 and 3. As it was supposed to happen, my seatmates were Horlick Minton, the new American ambassador to the Republic of San Lorenzo, and his wife Claire. They were white-haired, gentle and frail. Minton told me that he was a career diplomat, holding the rank of ambassador for the first time. He and his wife had so far served, he told me, in Bolivia, Chile, Japan, France, Yugoslavia, Egypt, the Union of South Africa, Liberia, and Pakistan. They were lovebirds. They entertained each other endlessly with little gifts, sights worth seeing out the plane window, amusing or instructive bits from things they read, random recollections of times gone by. They were, I think, a flawless example of what Bakonin calls a deprasse, which is a cuirass composed of only 2 persons. A true deprasse, Bakonin tells us, can't be invaded, not even by children born of such a union. I exclude the Mintons, therefore, from my own cuirass, from Frank's cuirass, from Newt's cuirass, from Asa Breed's cuirass, from Angela's cuirass, from Lyman Enders Noel's cuirass, from Sherman Krebs's cuirass. The Mintons' cuirass was a tidy one, composed of only 2. I should think you'd be very pleased, I said to Minton. What should I be pleased about? Pleased to have the rank of ambassador. From the pitying way Minton and his wife looked at each other, I gathered that I had said a fat-headed thing, but they humored me. Yes, winced Minton, I'm very pleased. He smiled wanly. I'm deeply honored. And so it went with almost every subject I brought up. I couldn't make the Mintons bubble about anything. For instance, I suppose you can speak a lot of languages, I said. Oh, 6 or 7 between us, said Minton. That must be very gratifying. What must? Said Minton. Being able to speak to so many people of different nationalities. Very gratifying, he said emptily. Very gratifying, said his wife, and they went back to reading a fat typewritten manuscript that was spread across the armchair between them. Tell me, I said a little later, in all your wide travels, have you found people everywhere about the same at heart? Huh? Asked Minton. Well, do you find people to be about the same at heart wherever you go? He looked at his wife, making sure she had heard the question, and then turned back to me. About the same, wherever you go, he agreed. Bakonin tells us, incidentally, that members of a depress always die within a week of each other. When it came time for the Mintons to die, they did it within the same second. Chapter 42. Bicycles for Afghanistan. There was a small saloon in the rear of the plane, and I repaired there for a drink. It was there that I met another fellow American, H. Lowe Crosby of Evanston, Illinois, and his wife Hazel. They were heavy people, and in their 50s. They spoke twangingly. Crosby told me that he owned a bicycle factory in Chicago, that he had nothing but ingratitude from his employees, and that he was going to move his business to grateful San Lorenzo. You know San Lorenzo well? I asked. This will be the first time I've ever seen it, but everything I've heard about it I like, said H. Lowe Crosby. They've got discipline. They've got something you can count on from one year to the next. They don't have the government encouraging everybody to be some kind of original pissant nobody ever heard of before. Sir? Christ, back in Chicago, we don't make bicycles anymore. It's all human relations now. The eggheads sit around trying to figure out new ways for everybody to be happy. Nobody can get fired no matter what, and if somebody does accidentally make a bicycle, the unions accuse us of cruel and inhuman practices, and the government confiscates the bicycle for back taxes and gives it to a blind man in Afghanistan. And you think things will be better in San Lorenzo? I know damn well they will be. People down there are poor enough and scared enough and ignorant enough to have some common sense. Crosby asked me what my name was and what my business was. I told him, and his wife Hazel recognized my name as an Indiana name. She was from Indiana, too. My God, she said, are you a Hoosier? I admitted I was. I'm a Hoosier, too, she crowed. Nobody has to be ashamed of being a Hoosier. I'm not, I said. I never knew anybody who was. Hoosiers do all right. Lowe and I have been around the world twice, and everywhere we went, we found Hoosiers in charge of everything. That's reassuring. You know the manager of that new hotel in Istanbul? I don't. He's a Hoosier, and the military whatever he is in Tokyo. Attache, said her husband. He's a Hoosier, said Hazel, and the new ambassador to Yugoslavia. A Hoosier? I asked. Not only him, but the Hollywood editor of Life magazine, too. And that man in Chile. A Hoosier, too? You can't go anywhere a Hoosier hasn't made his mark, she said. The man who wrote Ben-Hur was a Hoosier. And James Whitcomb Riley. Are you from Indiana, too? I asked her husband. Nope, I'm a prairie stater. Land of Lincoln, as they say. As far as that goes, said Hazel triumphantly. Lincoln was a Hoosier, too. He grew up in Spencer County. Sure, I said. I don't know what it is about Hoosiers, said Hazel, but they've sure got something. If somebody was to make a list, they'd be amazed. That's true, I said. She grasped me firmly by the arm. We Hoosiers gotta stick together. Right. You call me Mom. What? Whenever I meet a young Hoosier, I tell them, you call me Mom. Uh-huh. Let me hear you say it, she urged. Mom? She smiled and let go of my arm. Some piece of clockwork had completed its cycle. My calling Hazel Mom had shut it off, and now Hazel was rewinding it for the next Hoosier to come along. Hazel's obsession with Hoosiers around the world was a textbook example of a false cuirass, a seeming team that was meaningless in terms of the ways God gets things done, a textbook example of what Bakonin calls a grand falloon. Other examples of grand falloons are the Communist Party, the Daughters of the American Revolution, the General Electric Company, the International Order of Oddfellows, and any nation, anytime, anywhere. As Bakonin invites us to sing along with him, if you wish to study a grand falloon, just remove the skin of a toy balloon. Chapter 43. The Demonstrator. H. Lowe Crosby was of the opinion that dictatorships were often very good things. He wasn't a terrible person, and he wasn't a fool. It suited him to confront the world with a certain barnyard clownishness, but many of the things he had to say about undisciplined mankind were not only funny, but true. The major point at which his reason and his sense of humor left him was when he approached the question of what people were really supposed to do with their time on Earth. He believed firmly that they were meant to build bicycles for him. I hope San Lorenzo is every bit as good as you've heard it is, I said. I only have to talk to one man to find out if it is or not, he said. When Papa Manzano gives his word of honor about anything on that little island, that's it. That's how it is. That's how it'll be. Oh my God. The thing I like, said Hazel, is that they all speak English, and they're all Christians. That makes things so much easier. You know how they deal with crime down there? Crosby asked me. Nope. They just don't have any crime down there. Papa Manzano's made crime so damn unattractive, nobody even thinks about it without getting sick. I heard you can lay a billfold in the middle of the sidewalk. You can come back a week later, and it'll be right there with everything still in it. Wow. You know what the punishment is for stealing something? Nope. The hook, he said. No fines, no probation, no 30 days in jail. It's the hook. The hook for stealing, for murder, for arson, for treason, for rape, for being a peep-in Tom. Break a law, any damn law at all, and it's the hook. Everybody can understand that, and San Lorenzo is the best behaved country in the world. What is the hook? They put up a gallows, see? 2 posts and a crossbeam, and then they take a great big kind of iron fish hook, and they hang it down from the crossbeam. And they take somebody who's dumb enough to break the law, and they put the point of the hook through one side of his belly and out the other, and they let him go. And there he hangs, by God, one damn sorry lawbreaker. Good God. I don't say it's good, said Crosby, but I don't say it's bad either. I sometimes wonder if something like that wouldn't clear up juvenile delinquency. Maybe the hook's a little extreme for a democracy. Public hanging's more like it. String up a few teenage car thieves on lampposts in front of their houses with signs around their necks saying, "Mama, here's your boy." Do that a few times and I think ignition locks would go the way of the rumble seat and the running board. We saw that thing in the basement of the waxworks in London, said Hazel. What thing? I asked her. The hook. Down in the Chamber of Horrors in the basement, they had a wax person hanging up from the hook. It looked so real, I wanted to throw up. Harry Truman didn't look anything like Harry Truman, said Crosby. Pardon me? In the waxworks, said Crosby. The statue of Truman. Didn't really look like him. Huh, most of them did, though, said Hazel. Was it anybody in particular hanging from the hook? I asked her. I don't think so. It was just somebody. Just a demonstrator? I asked. Yeah, there was a black velvet curtain in front of it, and you had to pull the curtain back to see. There was a note pinned to the curtain that said children weren't supposed to look. But kids did, said Crosby. There were kids down there, and they all looked. A sign like that is just catnip to kids, said Hazel. Well, how did the kids react when they saw the person on the hook? I asked. Oh, said Hazel. They reacted just about the way the grown-ups did. They just looked at it and didn't say anything. Just moved on to see what the next thing was. Huh. What was the next thing? It was an iron chair a man had been roasted alive in, said Crosby. He was roasted for murdering his son. Only, after they roasted him, Hazel recalled blandly, they found out he hadn't murdered his son at all. Chapter 44. Communist Sympathizers. When I again took up my seat beside the Duprass of Clare and Horlick Minton, I had some new information about them. I got it from the Crosbys. The Crosbys didn't know Minton, but they knew his reputation. They were indignant about his appointment as ambassador. They told me that Minton had once been fired by the State Department for his softness towards communism, and that communist dupes, or worse, had had him reinstated. Very pleasant little saloon back there, I said to Minton as I sat down. Hmm. He and his wife were still reading the manuscript that lay between them. I said, nice bar back there. Oh, good, I'm glad. The two read on, apparently uninterested in talking to me. And then Minton turned to me suddenly with a bittersweet smile, and he demanded, who was he, anyway? Who was who? The man you were talking to in the bar. We went back there for a drink, and when we were just outside, we heard you and a man talking. The man was talking very loudly. He said I was a communist sympathizer. A bicycle manufacturer named H. Lowe Crosby, I said. I felt myself reddening. I was fired for pessimism. Communism had nothing to do with it. I got him fired, said his wife. The only piece of real evidence produced against him was a letter I wrote to the New York Times from Pakistan. What did it say? Oh, it said a lot of things, she said, because I was very upset about how Americans couldn't imagine what it was like to be something else and proud of it. I see. But there was one sentence they kept coming back to again and again in the loyalty hearing, sighed Minton. Americans, he said, quoting his wife's letter to the Times, are forever searching for love in forms it never takes, in places it can never be. It must have something to do with the vanished frontier. Chapter 45. Why Americans Are Hated. Claire Minton's letter to the Times was published during the worst era of Senator McCarthy, and her husband was fired 12 hours after the letter was printed. What was so awful about the letter? I asked. The highest possible form of treason, said Minton, is to say that Americans aren't loved wherever they go, and in whatever they do. Claire tried to make the point that American foreign policy should recognize hate, rather than imagine love. I guess Americans are hated in a lot of places. People are hated in a lot of places. Claire pointed out in her letter that Americans, in being hated, were simply paying the normal penalty for being people, and that they were foolish to think they should somehow be exempted from that penalty. But the Loyalty Board didn't pay any attention to that. All they knew was that Claire and I both felt that Americans were unloved. Well, I'm glad the story had a happy ending. Huh? Said Minton. It finally came out all right, I said. Here you are, on your way to an embassy, all your own. Minton and his wife exchanged another of those pitying, depressed glances. Then Minton said to me, yes, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is ours. End of chapter 45. Chapter 46. The Buchananist Method for Handling Caesar. I talked to the Mintons about the legal status of Franklin Honecker, who was, after all, not only a big shot in Papa Manzano's government, but a fugitive from United States justice. That's all been written off, said Minton. He isn't a United States citizen anymore, and he seems to be doing good things where he is, so that's that. He gave up his citizenship? Anybody who declares allegiance to a foreign state or serves in its armed forces or accepts employment in its government loses his citizenship. Read your passport. You can't lead the sort of funny paper international romance that Frank has and still have Uncle Sam for a mother chicken. Huh. Is he well liked in San Lorenzo? Minton weighed in his hands the manuscript he and his wife had been reading. I don't know yet, but this book says not. What book is that? It's the only scholarly book ever written about San Lorenzo. Sort of scholarly, said Claire. Sort of scholarly, echoed Minton. Hasn't been published yet. This is one of 5 copies. He handed it to me, inviting me to read as much as I liked. I opened the book to its title page and found that the name of the book was San Lorenzo, the Land, the History, the People. The author was Philip Castle, the son of Julian Castle, the hotel-keeping son of the great altruist I was on my way to see. I let the book fall open where it would. As it happened, it fell open to the chapter about the island's outlawed holy man, Buchanan. There was a quotation from the books of Buchanan on the page before me. These words leapt from the page and into my mind, and they were welcomed there. The words were a paraphrase of the suggestion by Jesus, "Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's." Buchanan's paraphrase was this: "Pay no attention to Caesar. Caesar doesn't have the slightest idea what's really going on. Chapter 47. Dynamic Tension. I became so absorbed in Philip Castle's book that I didn't even look up from it when we put down I didn't look I didn't even look up from it when we put down for 10 minutes in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I didn't even look up when somebody whispered, thrilled, that a midget had come aboard. A little while later I looked around for the midget, but I could not see him. I did see, right in front of Hazel and H. Lo Crosby, a horse-faced woman with platinum blonde hair, a woman new to the passenger list. Next to her was a seat that appeared to be empty, a seat that might well have sheltered a midget without my seeing even the top of his head. But it was San Lorenzo, the land, the history, the people, that intrigued me then. So I looked no harder for the midget. Midgets are, after all, diversions for sillier, quiet times, and I was serious and excited about Buchanan's theory of what he called dynamic tension, his sense of a priceless equilibrium between good and evil. When I first saw the term dynamic tension in Philip Castle's book, I laughed what I imagined to be a superior laugh. The term was a favorite of Buchanan's, according to young Castle's book, and I supposed that I knew something that Buchanan didn't know, that the term was one vulgarized by Charles Atlas, a mail-order muscle builder. As I learned when I read on, briefly, Buchanan knew exactly who Charles Atlas was. Buchanan was, in fact, an alumnus of his muscle-building school. It was the belief of Charles Atlas that muscles could be built without barbells or spring exercisers, could be built by simply pitting one set of muscles against another. It was the belief of Buchanan that good societies could be built only by pitting good against evil, and by keeping the tension between the two high at all times. And in Castle's book, I read my first Buchananist poem, or Calypso. It went like this. Papa Manzano, he's so very bad. But without bad Papa, I would be so sad. Because without Papa's badness, tell me if you would, how could wicked old Buchanan ever, ever look good? Chapter 48. Just like St. Augustine. Buchanan, I learned from Castle's book, was born in 1891. He was a black man, born an Episcopalian and a British subject on the island of Tobago. He was christened Lionel Boyd Johnson. He was the youngest of 6 children, born to a wealthy family. His family's wealth derived from the discovery by Buchanan's grandfather of $250,000 in buried pirate treasure, presumably a treasure of Blackbeard, of Edward Teach. Blackbeard's treasure was reinvested by Buchanan's family in asphalt, copra, cacao, livestock, and poultry. Young Lionel Boyd Johnson was educated in Episcopal schools, did well as a student, and was more interested in ritual than most. As a youth, for all his interest in the outward trappings of organized religion, he seems to have been a caresser, for he invites us to sing along with him in his 14th Calypso. When I was young, I was so gay and mean, and I drank and chased the girls just like young St. Augustine. He got to be a saint, so if I get to be one also, please, Mama, don't you faint. Chapter 49. A fish pitched up by an angry sea. Lionel Boyd Johnson was intellectually ambitious enough, in 1911, to sail from Tobago to London in a sloop named the Lady's Slipper. His purpose was to gain a higher education. He enrolled in the London School of Economics and Political Science. His education was interrupted by the First World War. He enlisted in the infantry, fought with distinction, was commissioned in the field, was mentioned 4 times in dispatches. He was gassed in the Second Battle of Ypres, was hospitalized for 2 years, and then discharged, and he set sail for home, for Tobago, alone in the Lady's Slipper again. When only 80 miles from home, he was stopped and searched by a German submarine, the U-99. He was taken prisoner, and his little vessel was used by the Huns for target practice. While still surfaced, the submarine was surprised and captured by the British destroyer the Raven. Johnson and the Germans were taken on board the destroyer, and the U-99 was sunk. The Raven was bound for the Mediterranean, but it never got there. It lost its steering. It could only wallow helplessly, or make grand clockwise circles. It came to rest at last in the Cape Verde Islands. Johnson stayed in those islands for 8 months, awaiting some sort of transportation to the Western Hemisphere. He got a job at last as a crewman on a fishing vessel that was carrying illegal immigrants to New Bedford, Massachusetts. The vessel was blown ashore at Newport, Rhode Island. By that time, Johnson had developed a conviction that something was trying to get him somewhere for some reason. He stayed in Newport for a while to see if he had destiny there. Worked as a gardener and a carpenter on the famous Rumford estate. During that time, he glimpsed many distinguished guests of the Rumfords, among them J.P. Morgan, General John J. Pershing, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Enrico Caruso, Warren Gamaliel Harding, and Harry Houdini. And it was during that time that the First World War came to an end, having killed 10 million persons and wounded 20 million, Johnson among them. When the war ended, the young rake-hell of the Rumford family, Remington Rumford IV, proposed to sail his steam yacht, the Scheherazade, around the world, visiting Spain, France, Italy, Greece, Egypt, India, China, Japan. He invited Johnson to accompany him as first mate, and Johnson agreed. Johnson saw many wonders of the world on the voyage. The Scheherazade was rammed in a fog in Bombay Harbor, and only Johnson survived. He stayed in India for 2 years, becoming a follower of Mohandas K. Gandhi. He was arrested for leading groups that protested British rule by lying down on railroad tracks. When his jail term was over, he was shipped at Crown expense to his home in Tobago. There, he built another schooner, which he called the Lady Slipper II. And he sailed her about the Caribbean, an idler, still seeking the storm that would drive him ashore on what was unmistakably his destiny. In 1922, he sought shelter from a hurricane in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, which country was then occupied by United States Marines. Johnson was approached there by a brilliant, self-educated, idealistic Marine deserter named Earl McCobb. McCobb was a corporal. He had just stolen his company's recreation fund. He offered Johnson $500 for transportation to Miami, and the two set sail for Miami. But a gale hounded the schooner onto the rocks of San Lorenzo. The boat went down. Johnson and McCabe, absolutely naked, managed to swim ashore, as Buchanan himself reports the adventure. A fish pitched up by an angry sea, I gasped on land, and I became me. He was enchanted by the mystery of coming ashore naked on an unfamiliar island. He resolved to let the adventure run its full course, resolved to see just how far a man might go, emerging naked from salt water. It was a rebirth for him. Be like a baby, the Bible say, so I stay like a baby to this very day. How he came by the name of Buchanan was very simple. Buchanan was the pronunciation given the name Johnson in the island's English dialect. As for that dialect, the dialect of San Lorenzo is both easy to understand and difficult to write down. I say it is easy to understand, but, I speak only for myself. Others have found it as incomprehensible as Basque, so my understanding of it may be telepathic. Philip Castle, in his book, gave a phonetic demonstration of the dialect and caught its flavor very well. He chose for this sample the San Lorenzo version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. In American English, one version of that immortal poem goes like this. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, shining in the sky so bright, like a tea tray in the night. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. In the San Lorenzo dialect, according to Castle, the same poem went like this. Zvenko, zvenko, ledpul stor, koji zventor batjuor, putchink onlo zisho breath, kam un titron onlo nath. Zvenko, zvenko, ledpul stor, koji zventor batvujor. Shortly after Johnson became Buchanan, incidentally, the lifeboat of his shattered ship was found on shore. The boat was later painted gold and made the bed of the island's chief executive. There is a legend, made up by Buchanan, Philip Castle wrote in his book, that the golden boat will sail again when the end of the world is near. Chapter 50. A Nice Midget. My reading of the life of Buchanan was interrupted by H. Lowe Crosby's wife Hazel. She was standing in the aisle next to me. You'll never believe it, she said, but I just found 2 more Hoosiers on the airplane. I'll be damned. They weren't born Hoosiers, but they live there now. They live in Indianapolis. Very interesting. Do you want to meet them? Do you think I should? The question baffled her. They're your fellow Hoosiers. What are their names? Well, her name is Connors, and his name is Honecker. They're brother and sister, and he's a midget. He's a nice midget, though. She wrinkled. He's a smart little thing. Does he call you Mom? I almost asked him to, and then I stopped and wondered if maybe wouldn't it be rude to ask a midget to do that? Nonsense. Chapter 51. Okay, Mom. So I went aft to talk to Angela Honecker Connors and little Newton Honecker, members of my cuirass. Angela was the horse-faced platinum blonde I had noticed earlier. Newt was a very small young man indeed, although not grotesque. He was as nicely scaled as Gulliver among the Brobdingnagians. I didn't read Gulliver's Travels. And as shrewdly watchful, too. He held a glass of champagne, which was included in the price of his ticket. The glass was to him what a fishbowl would have been to a normal man, but he drank from it with elegant ease, as though he and the glass could not have been better matched. The little son of a bitch had a crystal of Ice 9 and a thermos bottle in his luggage, and so did his miserable sister, while under us was God's own amount of water, the Caribbean Sea. When Hazel got all the pleasure she could from introducing Hoosiers to Hoosiers, she left us alone. Remember, she said as she left us, from now on, call me Mom. Okay, Mom, I said. Okay, Mom, said Newt. His voice was fairly high, in keeping with his little larynx, but he managed to make that voice distinctly masculine. Angela persisted in treating Newt like an infant, and he forgave her for it with an amiable grace I would have thought impossible. Newt and Angela remembered me, remembered the letters I'd written, and invited me to take the empty seat in their group of 3. Angela apologized to me for never having answered my letters. I couldn't think of anything to say that would interest anybody reading a book. I could have made up something about that day, but I didn't think you'd want that. Actually, the day was just like a regular day. Your brother here wrote me a very good letter. Angela was surprised. Newt did. How could Newt remember anything? She turned to him. Honey, you don't remember anything about that day, do you? You were just a baby. I remember, he said mildly. I wish I'd seen the letter. She implied that Newt was still too immature to deal directly with the outside world. Angela was a god-awfully insensitive woman, with no feeling for what smallness meant to Newt. Honey, you should have shown me that letter, she scolded. Sorry, said Newt. I didn't think to. I might as well tell you, Angela said to me. Dr. Bree told me I wasn't supposed to cooperate with you. He said you weren't interested in giving a fair picture of Father. She showed me that she didn't like me for that. But I placated her some by telling her that the book would probably never be done anyway, and that I no longer had a clear idea of what it would or should mean. Well, if you ever do make the book, you'd better make Father a saint, because that's what he was. I promised that I would do my best to paint that picture. I asked if she and Newt were bound for family reunion with Frank in San Lorenzo. Frank's getting married, said Angela. We're going to the engagement party. Oh, well, who's the lucky girl? I'll show you, said Angela. She took from her purse a billfold that contained a sort of plastic accordion. In each of the accordion's pleats was a photograph. Angela flipped through the photographs, giving me glimpses of little Newt on a Cape Cod beach, of Dr. Felix Honecker accepting his Nobel Prize, of Angela's own homely twin girls, of Frank flying a model plane on the end of a string. And then she showed me a picture of the girl Frank was going to marry. She might, with equal effect, have struck me in the groin. The picture she showed me was of Mona Amons Manzano, the woman I loved. Chapter 52. No Pain. Once Angela had opened her plastic accordion, she was reluctant to close it until someone had looked at every photograph. There are the people I love, she declared. So I looked at the people she loved, what she had trapped in plexiglass, what she had trapped like fossil beetles in amber, were the images of a large part of our cuirass. There wasn't a grand fallooner in the collection. There were many photographs of Dr. Honecker, father of a bomb, father of 3 children, father of Ice 9. He was a little person, the purported sire of a midget and a giantess. My favorite picture of the old man in Angela's fossil collection showed him all bundled up for winter, in an overcoat, scarf, galoshes, and a wool knit cap with a big pom-pom on the crown. This picture, Angela told me with a catch in her throat, had been taken in Hyannis just about 3 hours before the old man died. A newspaper photographer had recognized the seeming Christmas elf for the great man he was. Did your father die in the hospital? Oh no, he died in our cottage, in a big white wicker chair facing the sea. Newt and Frank had gone walking down the beach in the snow. It was a very warm snow, said Newt. It was almost like walking through orange blossoms. It was very strange. Nobody was in any of the other cottages. Ours was the only one with heat. Nobody within miles, recalled Newt wonderingly, and Frank and I came across this big black dog out on the beach, a Labrador retriever. We threw sticks into the ocean, and he brought them back. I'd gone back to the village for more Christmas tree bulbs, said Angela. We always had a tree. Did your father enjoy having a Christmas tree? He never said Newt. I think he liked it, said Angela. He just wasn't very demonstrative. Some people aren't. And some people are, said Newt. He gave a small shrug. Anyway, said Angela, when we got back home we found him in the chair. She shook her head. I don't think he suffered any. He just looked asleep. He couldn't have looked like that if there had been the least bit of pain. She left out an interesting part of the story. She left out the fact that it was on that same Christmas Eve that she and Frank and little Newt had divided up the old man's ice 9. Chapter 53. The President of Fabritech. Angela encouraged me to go on looking at snapshots. That's me, if you can believe it. She showed me an adolescent girl, 6 feet tall. She was holding a clarinet in the picture, wearing the marching uniform of the Ilium High School band. Her hair was tucked up under a bandsman's hat. She was smiling with shy good cheer. And then Angela, a woman to whom God had given virtually nothing with which to catch a man, showed me a picture of her husband. So that's Harrison C. Connors. I was stunned. Her husband was a strikingly handsome man and looked as though he knew it. He was a snappy dresser and had the lazy rapture of a Don Juan about the eyes. What does he do? I asked. He's the president of Fabritech. Electronics? I couldn't tell you even if I knew. It's all very secret government work. Oh, weapons? Well, war anyway. How did you happen to meet? He used to work as a laboratory assistant to Father, said Angela. Then he went out to Indianapolis and started Fabritech. So your marriage to him was a happy ending to a long romance? No, I didn't even know he knew I was alive. I used to think he was nice, but he never paid any attention to me until after Father died. One day he came through Ilium. I was sitting around that big old house thinking my life was over. She spoke of the awful days and weeks that followed her father's death. Just me and little Newt in that big old house. Frank had disappeared, and the ghosts were making 10 times as much noise as Newt and I were. I'd given my whole life to taking care of Father, driving him to and from work, bundling him up when it was cold, unbundling him when it was hot, making him eat, paying his bills. Suddenly there wasn't anything for me to do. I never had any close friends. Didn't have a soul to turn to but Newt. And then, she continued, there was a knock on the door, and there stood Harrison Connors. He was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. He came in, and we talked about Father's last days, and about old times in general. Angela almost cried now. 2 weeks later, we were married. Chapter 54. Communists, Nazis, Royalists, Parachutists, and Draft Dodgers. Returning to my own seat in the plane, feeling far shabbier for having lost Mona Amon's Monzano to Frank, I resumed my reading of Philip Castle's manuscript. I looked up Monzano, Mona Amon's in the index, and I was told by the index to see Amon's Mona. So I saw Amon's Mona, and found almost as many page references as I had found after the name of Papa Monzano himself. And after Amon's Mona came Amon's Nestor, so I turned to the few pages that had to do with Nestor, and I learned that he was Mona's father, a native Finn, an architect. Nestor Ammons was captured by the Russians and then liberated by the Germans during the Second World War. He was not returned home by his liberators, but was forced to serve in a Wehrmacht engineer unit that was sent to fight the Yugoslav partisans. He was captured by Chetniks, royalist Serbian partisans, and then by communist partisans who attacked the Chetniks. He was liberated by Italian parachutists who surprised the communists, and he was shipped to Italy. The Italians put him to work designing fortifications for Sicily. He stole a fishing boat in Sicily and reached neutral Portugal. While there, he met an American draft dodger named Julian Castle. Castle, upon learning that Ammons was an architect, invited him to come with him to the island of San Lorenzo and to design for him the hospital to be called the House of Hope and Mercy in the Jungle. Ammons accepted. He designed the hospital, married a native woman named Celia, fathered a perfect daughter, and died. Chapter 55. Never index your own book. As for the life of Ammons Mona, the index itself gave a jangling, surrealistic picture of the many conflicting forces that had been brought to bear on her, and of her dismayed reactions to them. Ammons Mona, the index said. Adopted by Manzano in order to boost Manzano's popularity, 194 to 199, 216. Childhood and Compound of House of Hope and Mercy, page 63 to 81. Childhood Romance with P. Castle, 72F. Death of Father, 89. Death of Mother, 92. Embarrassed by role as National Erotic Symbol, 80, 95, 166, 209, 247, 400, 406, 566, 678. Engaged to P. Castle, 193. Essential Naivete, 67 to 71, 80, 95, 116, 209, 274, 400 to 406, 566, and 678. Lives with Buchanan, 92 to 98, 196 to 197. Poems about 2, 26, 114, 119, 311, 316, 477, 501, 507, 555, 689, 718, 799, 800, 841, 846, 908, 971, 974. Poems by 89, 92, 193. Returns to Manzano, 199. Returns to Buchanan, 197. Runs away from Buchanan, 199. Runs away from Manzano, 197. Tries to make self ugly in order to stop being erotic symbol to islanders, 80, 95, 116, 209, 247, 400 to 406, 566, 678. Tutored by Buchanan, 63 to 80. Writes letter to United Nations, 200. Xylophone virtuoso, 71. I showed this index entry to the Mintons, asking them if they didn't think it was an enchanting biography in itself, the biography of a reluctant goddess of love, and I got an unexpectedly expert answer, as one does in life sometimes. It appeared that Claire Minton, in her time, had been a professional indexer. I had never heard of such a profession before. She told me that she put her husband through college years before with their earnings as an indexer, but the earnings had been good, and that few people could index well. She said that indexing was a thing that only the most amateurish author undertook to do for his own book. I asked her what she thought of Philip Castle's job. Flattering to the author, insulting to the reader, she said. In a hyphenated word, she observed with the shrewd amiability of an expert, self-indulgent. I'm always embarrassed when I see an index an author has made of his own work. Embarrassed? It's a revealing thing, an author's index of his own work, she informed me. It's a shameless exhibition to the trained eye. She can read character from an index, said her husband. Oh, I said. What can you tell about Philip Castle? She smiled faintly. Things I had better not tell strangers. Sorry. He's obviously in love with this Mona Manzano, she said. That's true of every man in San Lorenzo, I gather. He has mixed feelings about his father, she said. That's true of every man on earth, I egged her on gently. He's insecure. What mortal isn't? I demanded. I didn't know it then, but that was a very Baconist thing to demand. He'll never marry her. Why not? I've said all I'm going to say, she said. I'm gratified to meet an indexer who respects the privacy of others. Never index your own book, she stated. A deprass, Buchanan tells us, is a valuable instrument for gaining and developing, in the privacy of an interminable love affair, insights that are queer but true. The Minton's cunning explanation of indexes was surely a case in point. A deprass, Buchanan tells us, is also a sweetly conceited establishment. The Minton's establishment was no exception. Sometime later, Ambassador Minton and I met on the aisle of the airplane, away from his wife, and he showed that it was important to him that I respect what his wife could find out from indexes. You know why Castle will never marry the girl, even though he loves her, even though she loves him, even though they grew up together? He whispered. No, sir, I don't. Because he's a homosexual, whispered Minton. She can tell that from an index, too. Chapter 56. A Self-Supporting Squirrel Cage. When Lionel Boyd Johnson and Corporal Earl McCabe were washed up naked on the shore of San Lorenzo, I read, they were greeted by persons far worse off than they. The people of San Lorenzo had nothing but diseases, which they were at a loss to treat or even name. By contrast, Johnson and McCabe had the glittering treasures of literacy, ambition, curiosity, gall, irreverence, health, humor, and considerable information about the outside world. From the Calypsos again. Oh, a very sorry people, yes, did I find here. Oh, they had no music, and they had no beer. And oh, everywhere where they tried to perch belonged to Castle Sugar Incorporated, or to the Catholic Church. This statement of the property situation in San Lorenzo in 1922 is entirely accurate, according to Philip Castle. Castle Sugar was founded, as it happened, by Philip Castle's great-grandfather. In 1922, it owned every piece of arable land on the island. Castle Sugar's San Lorenzo operations, wrote young Castle, never showed a profit. But by paying laborers nothing for their labor, the company managed to break even year after year, making just enough money to pay the salaries of the workers' tormentors. The form of government was anarchy, save in limited situations wherein Castle Sugar wanted to own something or to get something done. In such situations, the form of government was feudalism. The nobility was composed of Castle Sugar's plantation bosses, who were heavily armed white men from the outside world. The knighthood was composed of big natives who, for small gifts and silly privileges, would kill or wound or torture on command. The spiritual needs of the people, caught in this demoniacal squirrel cage, were taken care of by a handful of butterball priests. The San Lorenzo Cathedral, dynamited in 1923, was generally regarded as one of the man-made wonders of the New World, wrote Castle. Chapter 57. The Queasy Dream. That Corporal McCabe and Johnson were able to take command of San Lorenzo was not a miracle in any sense. Many people had taken over San Lorenzo and had invariably found it lightly held. The reason was simple. God, in his infinite wisdom, had made the island worthless. Hernando Cortez was the first man to have his sterile conquest of San Lorenzo recorded on paper. Cortez and his men came ashore for fresh water in 1519, named the island, claimed it for Emperor Charles V, and never returned. Subsequent expeditions came for gold and diamonds and rubies and spices, found none, burned a few natives for entertainment and heresy, and sailed on. When France claimed San Lorenzo in 1682, writes Castle, No Spaniards complained. When Denmark claimed San Lorenzo in 1699, no Frenchmen complained. When the Dutch claimed San Lorenzo in 1704, no Danes complained. When England claimed San Lorenzo in 1706, no Dutchman complained. When Spain reclaimed San Lorenzo in 1720, no Englishman complained. When, in 1786, African black men took command of a British slave ship, ran it ashore on San Lorenzo, and proclaimed San Lorenzo as an independent nation, an empire, with an emperor, in fact, no Spaniards complained. The empire was Tumbumba, the only person who ever regarded the island as being worth defending. A manic, Tumbumba caused to be erected the San Lorenzo Cathedral and the fantastic fortifications on the north shore of the island, fortifications within which the private residence of the so-called President of the Republic now stands. The fortifications have never been attacked, nor has any sane man ever proposed any reason why they should be attacked. They've never defended anything. 1,400 persons are said to have died while building them. Of these 1,400, about half are said to have been executed in public for substandard zeal. Castle Sugar came to San Lorenzo in 1916, during the sugar boom of the First World War. There was no government at all. The company imagined that even the clay and gravel fields of San Lorenzo could be tilled profitably with the price of sugar so high. And no one complained. When McCabe and Johnson arrived in 1922 and announced they were placing themselves in charge, Castle Sugar withdrew flaccidly, as though from a queasy dream. Chapter 58. Tyranny with a Difference. Jesus Christ. I'm gonna get a do not disturb sign. Chapter 58. Tyranny with a Difference. There was at least one quality of the new conquerors of San Lorenzo that was really new, wrote young Castle. McCabe and Johnson dreamed of making San Lorenzo a utopia. To this end, McCabe overhauled the economy and the laws, and Johnson designed a new religion. Castle quoted the calypsos again. I wanted all things to seem to make some sense, so we could all be happy, yes, instead of tense. And I made up lies so that they fit all nice, and I made this sad world a paradise. There was a tug on my coat sleeve as I read. I looked up. Little Newt Honecker was standing in the aisle next to me. I thought maybe you'd like to go back to the bar, he said, and hoist a few. So we did hoist and topple a few, and Newt's tongue was loosened enough to tell me some things about Zinka, his Russian dancer friend. Their love nest, he told me, had been his father's cottage on Cape Cod. I may not ever have a marriage, but at least I've had a honeymoon. He told me of idyllic hours that he and Zinka had spent in each other's arms, cradled in Felix Honecker's old white wicker chair, the chair that faced the sea. And Zinka would dance for him. Imagine, a woman dancing just for me. I can see you have no regrets. She broke my heart, didn't like that much, but that was the price. In this world you get what you pay for. He proposed a gallant toast. Sweethearts and wives, he cried. Chapter 59. Fasten your seatbelts. I was in the bar with Newt and H. Lowe Crosby and a couple of strangers when San Lorenzo was sighted. Crosby was talking about pissants. You know what I mean by a pissant? I know the term, I said, but it obviously doesn't have the ding-a-ling associations for me that it has for you. Crosby was in his cups and had the drunkard's illusion that he could speak frankly, provided he spoke affectionately. He spoke frankly and affectionately of Newt's size, something nobody else in the bar had so far commented on. I don't meet a little feller like this. Crosby hung a ham hand on Newt's shoulder. It isn't size that makes a man a pissant. It's the way he thinks. I've seen men 4 times as big as this little feller here, and they were pissants. I've seen little fellers, well, not this little actually, but pretty damn little, by God, and I'd call them real men. Thanks, said Newt pleasantly, not even glancing at the monstrous hand on his shoulder. Never had I seen a human being better adjusted to such a humiliating physical handicap. I shuddered with admiration. You were talking about pissants, I said to Crosby, hoping to get the weight of his hand off Newt. Damn right I was. Crosby straightened up. You haven't told us what a pissant is yet, I said. A pissant is somebody who thinks he's so damn smart he can never keep his mouth shut. No matter what anybody says, he's got to argue with it. You say you like something, and by God, he'll tell you why you're wrong to like it. A pissant does his best to make you feel like a boob all the time. No matter what you say, he knows better. Not a very attractive characteristic, I suggested. My daughter wanted to marry a pissant once, said Crosby darkly. Did she? I squashed him like a bug. Crosby hammered on the bar, remembering things the pissant had said and done. Jesus, he said. We've all been to college. His gaze lit on Newt again. You go to college? Cornwell, said Newt. Cornwell, said Crosby gladly. My God, I went to Cornwell. So did he. Newt nodded at me. Did I say Cornwell twice instead of Cornwell 3 times instead of Cornell? We're leaving it in. 3 Cornelians, all on the same plane, said Crosby. We had another grand Falloon festival on our hands. When it subsided some, Crosby asked Newt what he did. I paint. Houses? Pictures. I'll be damned, said Crosby. Turn to your seats and fasten your seatbelts, please, warned the airline hostess. We're over Monzano Airport, Bolivar, San Lorenzo. Christ, now wait just a goddamn minute here, said Crosby, looking down at Newt. All of a sudden I realize you've got a name I've heard before. My father was the father of the atom bomb. Newt didn't say Felix Honecker was one of the fathers. He said Felix was the father. Is that so? Said Crosby. That's so. I was thinking about something else, said Crosby. He had to think hard. Something about a dancer. I think we'd better get back to our seats, said Newt, tightening some. Something about a Russian dancer. Crosby was sufficiently addled by booze to see no harm in thinking out loud. I remember there was an editorial about how maybe the dancer was a spy. Please, gentlemen, said the stewardess, you really must get back to your seats and fasten your belts. Newt looked up at H. Lowe Crosby innocently. You sure the name was Honecker? And, in order to eliminate any chance of mistaken identity, he spelled the name for Crosby. I could be wrong, said H. Lowe Crosby. Chapter 60. An Underprivileged Nation. This will be the last one for today. I feel like they're arriving on the island is a good time to stop. The island, seen from the air, was an amazingly regular rectangle. Cruel and useless stone needles were thrust up from the sea. They sketched a circle around it. At the south end of the island was the port city of Bolivar. It was the only city. It was the capital. And it was built on a marshy table. The runways of Monzano Airport were on its waterfront. The mountains arose abruptly to the north of Bolivar, crowding the remainder of the island with their brutal humps. They were called the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, but they look like pigs at a trough to me. Bolivar had many names: Casma, Santa Maria, St. Louis, St. George, and Port Glory among them. It was given its present name by Johnson and McCabe in 1922, and was named in honor of Simon Bolivar, the great Latin American idealist and hero. When Johnson and McCabe came upon the city, it was built of twigs, tin, crates, and mud, rested on the catacombs of a trillion happy scavengers, catacombs in a sour mash of slop, feculence, and slime. That was pretty much the way I found it, too, except for the new architectural false face along the waterfront. Johnson and McCabe had failed to raise the people from misery and muck. Papa Manzano had failed, too. Everybody was bound to fail, for San Lorenzo was as unproductive as an equal area in the Sahara or the polar ice cap. At the same time, it had as dense a population as could be found anywhere, India and China not excluded. There were 450 inhabitants for each uninhabitable square mile. During the idealistic phase of McCabe's and Johnson's reorganization of San Lorenzo, it was announced that the country's total income would be divided among all adult persons in equal shares, wrote Philip Castle. The first and only time this was tried, each share came to between $6 and $7. Next time we're going to be picking up with chapter 61, What a Corporal Was Worth.